Before we jump into coding each task in this project, let's take a second to look at how the project works. In the web.xml file, we define that any URL that starts with /books goes to controller servlet. Our app is currently running locally on port 8080. So if we go to localhost port 8080/books, we can see the book list page. And we can see how this page is shown by going to controller servlet's doGet method. And we see that unless the URL is /admin/new or /insert, the default is to go to the listBooks method. And if we look at that method, that calls book.dow listAllBooks. And listAllBooks selects all of the books from the book table in the SQL database. Then listBooks forwards that book list to the booklist.jsp page. Finally, if we look at the booklist.jsp page, we can see there's a for each loop that displays each book in a table. And that's how we get the result we see in the browser. The admin page works in a similar way, but the edit and delete functionality isn't working yet, so that's the starting state of our app. The goal in Module 1 is to add functionality to these delete and edit links here. First, we'll make these links pass the ID of the selected book to the URL edit or delete. We can do that in the bookadmin.jsp page. And we're going to use the Java standard tag library cout tag and the value set to item.getID. Now we need to edit our controller servlet to respond to the delete and edit requests. We'll start with delete by adding a method called deleteBook that takes in an HTTP servlet request and response. It also throws a servlet exception and IO exception since we'll be forwarding to a JSP page that may not exist. To get to this method, we need to add a case to our switch statement in the doGet method. So we'll add a delete case that calls our new deleteBook method. Before we can go ahead and fill in this method, let's add a method to book.dow that actually deletes the book from the database. First, we'll create a prepared statement. And before we do that, we'll create a string with our SQL query. Then we'll use the JDBC connection and the prepare statement method and pass in our SQL. We need to wrap this in a try-catch since we might get an SQL exception. Then we can set the ID in the SQL query to the ID that we passed in. Finally, we can execute the update and close the statement. Now that we have a method to actually delete the book from the database, let's go ahead and finish our deleteBook method in controller servlet. First, we need to get the ID that was passed in from the request with getParameter and the key ID. We can save the result to an int, but we also need to use integer.parseInt since the getParameter returns a string. Then we can call our book.dow's deleteBook method and pass in the ID to delete the book from the database. Finally, we'll redirect back to our book list page with response.sendRedirect_list. Now let's compile and test this method. We can test deleting a book by going to the admin page and clicking delete. We can see 1984 is gone from the list. We can also run the tests with this command. And we can see the only failing tests are from modules 2 and 3. So if we submit this code to GitHub and check our code on Pluralsight, we can move on to module 2 and work on editing books.